Hey, this is Stuart at creativeXP. Thanks for joining me for episode 4 of my DM-StormD map build for the original Unreal tournament. I'm changing some things up in this video, so let's get right into it. So by the end of the last episode, I was starting to get a bit more comfortable with the ways I could combine the different brushes to create the structure of the rooms, and I was pretty happy with how the level was shaping up. The general layout was good, and each room was starting to feel more distinct. Sure, there was some messy brushwork in places, a few hole and mirror effect here and there, but nothing that couldn't be fixed as I continued to iterate on each room, right? Well, so I thought as I started to update the chamber, but then I began to realise that my brushwork in here was actually going to lead to a lot more headaches further down the road. To show you what I mean, let's switch to the zone and portal view in the editor here. Each differently coloured shape in this view represents a polygon. These polygons are created by the BSP build process, which cuts the level geometry based on the brushes to determine what the engine needs to render in a scene during runtime. You still with me? Okay, put simply, the more of these shapes and different cut angles there are, the more likely we're going to run into BSP issues in the level, which is bad. Take this seemingly flat wall. When we look at it in this view, we can see that the BSP has split this into separate polygons. If I remove this brush and rebuild the level, you can see how the wall is no longer segmented into as many polygons. So to avoid this sort of messy brushwork, I'm going to change some parts of my workflow to make rebuilding this room quicker and cleaner going forward. The first thing I want to do is make it easier to focus on a particular room of the level by decluttering the view. As you can see, my messy brushwork isn't just causing BSP issues, it's making it hard to work out what I'm even doing in this jumble of lines. Unreal Ed has a grouping functionality, but it's not something that I've looked into much before now. And looking at official maps, it appears to have a limited usage there as well. That said, I think I can put it to good use to make sense of the editor view as I focus on a particular room's updates. I did a rough selection of all the brushes and actors in each room and added them to their own individual groups. With that set up, I can now easily toggle the visibility of the rooms that I'm not working on to give me a cleaner editor view to work with. Something else I was able to do was to use the group selections to move each room into its own area of the editor, turning the level into a kind of exploded view diagram or schematic. This gives me some flexibility to move rooms around freely as I test things in the level, but also provides some space for my next workflow improvement. Up until now, I've been using large, basic brushes to quickly block out the level layout, but now that I'm starting to consider more details and structural elements of each room, I can begin using a common process in Unreal mapping called the builder room. And what this is a large subtracted room that I can use to construct complex brushes or detail elements away from the playable part of my level without having to worry about the brushes creating lots of messy BSP cuts. I'll eventually remove this room and everything in it before I complete the level in the future, so I also don't need to worry so much about keeping the space tidy whilst I'm continuing to build the map. Once I've constructed a shape with a combination of brushes, I can use the intersect functionality to turn my builder brush into a near perfect copy of the element. With my builder brush primed, I can now add the element to the level wherever I need it. Once added, it will act like a single brush instead of the collection of separate brushes that was used to construct it, making it quick and easy to move as I construct the level. And check it out, it even copied the texture properties of the original brushes. I guess that means I'm going to have to start paying more attention to my texture selection going forward though if I want to use this build method. That's okay, I've got an idea to help with that as well. Welcome to my texture palette room. So Unreal Ed provides a texture browser with some useful filtering options, but it does have the drawback that you need to load each texture pack separately in order to view the late 90s artistic goodness. With a whopping 115 texture packs to sift through, it could take a while to find the exact type of texture that I want for each element of the level. Not to mention that there are a lot of these packs that contain textures for the character art or game menus, which aren't going to be that useful to me in creating the level. Thankfully, I've identified a few packs that contain a lot of textures that I'm likely to use based on my reference images and thoughts on the level. For everything else, I've added them to my texture palette room. It took a while, but after searching through all 115 texture packs, I was able to find a selection of individual assets from each pack that might be useful to me in the future. By creating a small box with each of these textures applied, I can now quickly scan this room if I'm looking for a particular appearance for something. I can also use the Alt right click shortcut to select the texture as the active one before building a new brush, or use the surface inspector to find out which pack the texture belongs to so that I can quickly find it in the texture browser. As you can see, Unreal Ed stores all the texture packs in the level's data so that I can load the correct textures when it's played. I don't want to make my level file bloated with too much texture data, so I don't plan to use all the textures in my palette room. I'll also try to use as few texture packs as possible as I build out the map with more details. Like the builder room, I'll also remove the palette room before releasing the final map since it won't be required for the playable level. The final major adjustment is to reduce the amount of subtracted and additive brushes used in each room, since this is what affects the BSP process when choosing how it should cut up the room into different polygons. Thankfully, there is a pretty handy option for doing this in the editor already. By changing the solidity of a brush to semi-solid, we can tell the engine to draw these shapes and create their collision, but don't use them to decide where the BSP should be cut. It's not a perfect solution, as semi-solid brushes can still be affected by BSP cuts, which means they can go a bit wonky where they intersect a cut caused by a subtracted or additive brush. But for the most part, careful use of the semi-solid option will help us greatly reduce the amount of unnecessary BSP cuts are in the level. So with all that in mind, let's rebuild the chamber and update its appearance based on the latest testing. So believe it or not, this is now the chamber. I know what you're probably thinking, we've taken about 10 steps back from where we were at the end of the last episode. Fear not, this is all part of the iterative process. By removing most of the structures in here, I can start rebuilding the space with cleaner brushwork. The first thing I was able to do after deleting all of the old structure was to modify the height of the room again to lower the mouth of the storm drain and make sure that the shell of the room was properly aligned to the grid. This will be important for re-adding the detail and structure later without introducing unwanted BSP cuts elsewhere. I've added a placeholder slope in the room for now just to provide a guideline to help gauge the angle of the decline as I reconstruct the room structure. Here we go, this is already feeling very different with a new lick of paint and some huge support columns. These supports are the first semi-solid addition to the level and were created in the builder room with a simple combination of brushes. Nothing overly complex at this stage, but using the intersect method I was able to quickly construct these 4 structural elements without issue. I created a modified version of the structure for the south side of the chamber as well. More complex is the new addition to the rear section in the north of the room. This structure is part of the key support for the ceiling above, which will eventually be separate from the rest of the chamber below. It also creates a focal point to house an important pickup, which for now is an armor piece. The smaller columns will also provide a parallax element, which is still something that I want to create at the top section of this room to help provide cover to mitigate the long combat ranges still present in the room. So the paint job is near complete at this stage, and as you can see I've gone for a concrete look, partly inspired by the Tokyo storm drains, but with a grimier look befitting an Unreal Tournament setting. I've also mixed up the surface types to break up the monotony of large concrete rendered walls. To further differentiate the smooth concrete and provide a bit more visual interest, I've started adding additional trim details and introducing a subtle slope to the walls. I'll add similar slopes to the upper parts of the walls to complement this, but I want this to look structural more than an aesthetic consideration. I've added some curved walls to the south end of the chamber to remove the boxy aspect of the room and complement the flowing path players will take as they run around the mouth of the storm drain. It also encroaches the space around the trap more, pushing players closer to the edge and preventing them from hiding in a corner, backs to the wall. Here we are with the sloping walls now added to the upper section of the room, but looking at it, I'm not entirely convinced that this is working as intended. It's creating the effect that the walls are bowing inwards and doesn't look all that structurally sound at the moment. I think I'll try and switch the slopes around and see if that looks any better. Okay, I think that this is working a bit better to give the walls a little variance, whilst also adding to the structural weight and integrity of the chamber walls. I ended up extending the slope of the upper sections all the way up to the ceiling, which has meant that this is much more subtle effect now. I also made the trim elements a bit narrower so that they aren't protruding from the walls as much now. I think with all the elements combined, the 4 main support structures that we start with are now more prominent, and look more suitable for holding up the enormous underground infrastructure. This is good since this is also where the access points to the bridge and neighbouring rooms will be added, giving them a nice focal point in the future. We now have the stairs back in place, and they should be built in a better way to reduce BSP cuts in the room. Before, I had the staircase built as one large wide brush that spanned the entire width of the chamber, which I then carved out the central channel with a number of rotated brushes, created with the 2D shape editor. This new approach is much cleaner, and allows for more control of the stair positions, as well as flexibility to add further details like an edge trim to the stairs. And here it is, a nicely edged staircase, ready for the central channel to be added to let water flow down the chamber towards the storm drain. I created the trim as one large brush for now, as it was pretty easy to subtract portions of the brush to match the stair angle along the grid before intersecting the arrangement to create the piece. Moving on to the central channel for the water flow, I returned to this reference image and decided to try a similar approach to create a stepped waterfall, rather than the trough I had before. If this works, it should fix a few issues with the previous arrangement, not least the BSP mess that was introduced with the large 2D shape editor brushes I used to create the channel before. I created another temporary builder room alongside the chamber to make it quick and easy to build the complex brushes in a proximate location, and then move them into place. As you can see, the brushes used to create this element are all lined up to the grid properly, but when combined are still creating a suitable trough shape. I can duplicate these shapes and gradually reduce the height of each vertex to produce a stepped waterfall that it will channel water properly and still let players run up and down it without any issues. Let's see if it works. Well, here's the finished channel, and I gotta say, I think it works. It gradually descends to the low level and players can navigate pretty freely around the space without any issues. The sloped edges of the channel are now much more accessible, and it's possible to run up the sides and out at the top end of the channel that was previously a dead end. These sections of the channel also work as an impromptu bridge connecting the east and west sides of the chamber where the access points to the neighbouring rooms will be in the future. I think that this will now remove the need for the secondary bridge that we added in the previous episode, which should give players more freedom of movement here. It does look like there is an issue with the staircase collision here caused by a BSP cut, but I'm not sure where that is coming from at this stage. I'll adjust the solidity of the stairs for now until I can actually pinpoint the cause of it. With the lower structural elements restored, all that remains now is to add the bridge that spans the upper level. I've used a similar approach to how I constructed the waterfall earlier, in that I've created a new builder room alongside the chamber and created the shape of the bridge by manipulating the vertices of some simple boxes. This shape is a bit more aesthetically pleasing than the placeholder bridge I had before, and hopefully looks more structurally sound. Well, it will be once I construct its support legs. And here they are. Since this bridge is a bit thinner than the blocky placeholder I had before, I felt that the supports didn't need to be very chunky. This also helps prevent the legs becoming a sticky obstacle that gets in players' way as they try and move up and down the stairs, or the waterfall. However, they are still thick enough to provide a line of sight blocker to the doorways at the top of the chamber, so we have another layer of parallax effect to mitigate the combat range concerns in this room. They also work for the access points that will be added to the sides of the room in the future. Overall, I think that this bridge really complements the other elements that we've added to the room, and it sits suitably prominent in the space without overpowering it. It also frames the armor pickup and waterfall nicely. All that the room needs now is something to break up that huge concrete ceiling. Here we go. I mean, it's pretty basic for now, but it conveys the intent. It can probably do with some additional trim around the edges, but I think I'll look at that in the future as I return to do a detailed pass on the room. Things like adding light fixtures or water trickling down the waterfall will help complete the room. But that is a job for another day and another video. For now, let's take a look at the zone and portal view again and compare the BSP cuts in this updated chamber to the version we started with. The walls are noticeably improved, as is the central channel area, despite the increase in structural detail and the addition of the new bridge. The areas around the stairs are still a bit messy in a few places, but I think that this can be fixed if we can find out what is cut in the stairs when they are set to semi-solid. Also, the northern wall is still cut at lots of angles where we still have the complex door shapes, but this should be another easy fix in the future. The mouth of the storm drain is also generating a lot of cuts due to the round shape of the opening. This might be something that we have to live with for now, as it's somewhat unavoidable in its current configuration. So there we have it. By changing my workflow, I've been able to quickly iterate and improve the chamber in a number of ways, both visually and functionally. Next time I'll start updating the overflow area to apply the lessons learned in this video and continue the map build. I hope you were able to join me for the next episode, but for now, thanks for watching.